The small town was buzzing with excitement that evening. A charity event was being held at the community hall, and people from all around had come to attend. The hall was decorated with simple ribbons and small lights that gave the room a warm, welcoming glow. At the center of it all stood a piano. But it was not a perfect shiny piano. It looked old and worn out. Some of its keys were chipped, others were sticky, and a few didn't even make a sound. Most people looked at it and whispered to each other, shaking their heads. It seemed almost impossible that anyone could play something like this and make it sound good. Among the crowd was a woman who didn't look like she belonged to this kind of event. She wore plain clothes, nothing fancy or eye-catching. There was no fancy bag, no polished shoes, just a quiet presence. People barely noticed her at first, and those who did often whispered with slight amusement. "She's probably just here for fun," they said. "Maybe she wants to try it, but she won't get far." The room was full of confident musicians, some well known in the town, and others who had played in bigger cities. They had polished instruments and crisp notes ready to impress. And here was this simple woman, standing calmly near the back. She didn't seem to mind the whispers or the curious glances. She carried a single sheet of music in her hand, folded carefully, and she looked at the piano as if it were an old friend. Her eyes lingered on the keys, and for a moment she seemed to be remembering something, perhaps a melody that had been in her heart for years. There was no rush, no sense of pressure. She waited for the right moment. The audience began to gather closer as the event was about to start. People chatted among themselves, not paying much attention to her. A few of the musicians joked quietly, nudging each other. "This will be fun to watch," one whispered, smirking. "Let's see how she handles that piano. Maybe we'll get a laugh out of it." Others laughed softly, shaking their heads, expecting nothing more than a clumsy attempt. In their minds, this woman was an outsider, someone who didn't belong on stage, but she didn't let their doubt affect her. Slowly, she walked toward the piano, her movements calm and measured. There was something gentle in the way she touched the bench before sitting down. She didn't rush. She placed her sheet of music on the stand, opened it carefully, and looked at the keys with a quiet focus. Her hands hovered above them for a few seconds, as if feeling the stories hidden inside the piano. The audience was starting to notice her now. Some curious, some still skeptical, waiting to see what would happen. Then, as the event officially began and all eyes turned to her, she took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The sound was soft, a little uneven, not perfect, but not unpleasant either. A few people in the crowd snickered, thinking this confirmed their expectations. But she didn't stop. She pressed the next key, then another, slowly building a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. There was a strange, quiet beauty in her touch. Even though the piano was broken in parts, she didn't fight it. Instead, she worked with it, letting its flaws become part of the music she wanted to share. Some audience members started to lean forward, intrigued. The first few notes had been simple, almost hesitant, but there was something honest about them, something that made people stop laughing. The room felt different, almost as if it was holding its breath. The woman's face was calm, but her eyes were alive with focus. She didn't rush through the music. She let each note settle, letting the sound resonate through the hall. There was no showiness, no attempt to impress with speed or complexity. It was pure, simple, and heartfelt. As she continued, the whispers in the room slowly changed. People stopped mocking her quietly and started murmuring to each other with surprise. "Wait, listen to that," someone said softly. "It's different, but it's beautiful." Another shook their head in disbelief. "How is she making that old piano sound like this?" The music seemed to capture something that went beyond just notes and rhythm. It touched something deeper in the listeners, stirring emotions they didn't expect to feel at a charity event. Even though it was the very beginning of her performance, it was clear that something unusual was happening. The woman, who had seemed simple and quiet, was slowly drawing the audience into a story that only she and the piano could tell together. And for the first time that evening, people weren't thinking about appearances, talent competitions, or reputation. They were listening, really listening to what was unfolding in front of them. By the time she finished the first few lines of her piece, there was a small, almost stunned silence. The laughter had completely vanished. The audience hadn't yet realized the magic that was beginning to emerge, but a seed of wonder had been planted. Everyone who had doubted her now wondered quietly whether they had underestimated something far more remarkable than they could have imagined. And in that moment, the simple woman at the broken piano was no longer just a quiet stranger in the room. She had become the center of attention, not because she demanded it, but because she invited it naturally, with nothing more than a handful of notes and a heart full of music. After those first soft notes, the woman didn't pause. She let her fingers glide slowly across the piano, touching each key with care. The broken piano responded in a way that was unexpected. Some notes were sharp, some soft, some even sounded a little off, but she didn't try to hide it. Instead, she worked with it. Each imperfection became part of the rhythm she was creating, almost like the piano itself was joining her in telling a story. The audience, who had moments ago been ready to laugh, now leaned in. Their whispers replaced by quiet curiosity. At first, some people still exchanged doubtful glances. A man in the front row shook his head slightly and muttered, "This won't last. It's just an accident she can't control." Another woman whispered to her friend, "It's sweet, I guess, but it doesn't sound like much." Yet, there was something in the air, a subtle tension that made people sit up straighter. They could sense that something unusual was happening. There was a feeling that this wasn't just a casual performance. There was intention in every movement, every note. Even when it didn't sound perfect, the woman's eyes remained closed for a moment as she found the flow of the music. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, but there was no need for exaggeration. It was quiet yet full of emotion. The broken piano, which had once been ignored, now seemed alive. The cracked keys, the silent notes, and the uneven sounds were no longer obstacles. Instead, they became part of the music, giving it a raw and honest character that no perfect piano could ever achieve. Every imperfection added depth. Every silence between the notes seemed to speak as loudly as the sound itself. People began to notice the change in the room. The initial whispers and laughter had disappeared entirely. There was a kind of tension, a shared sense of wonder, as if the audience had all been holding their breath, waiting for the next note to reveal itself. Some children in the crowd leaned forward, eyes wide, fascinated by the sounds. Some older people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them like a wave, feeling memories and emotions they hadn't thought of in years. Everyone could sense that this was more than just music. It was a story being told through sound. The woman's hands moved more confidently now. She no longer hesitated over the keys that were sticky or silent. Instead, she found ways to let her fingers dance around them, creating harmonies that made the music feel full and alive. The broken piano, once considered useless, now sang in a way that touched the hearts of everyone present. People began to realize that the magic wasn't just in the notes or even in the piano. It was in her understanding of how to turn flaws into something beautiful. The audience felt the emotion behind each note, the struggle, the patience, the hope. A few in the crowd exchanged glances, silently acknowledging their mistake in underestimating her. The confident musicians who had initially smirked now looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. One of them even leaned closer, trying to figure out how she was doing it. But it wasn't just skill or talent. It was something deeper. There was honesty in her performance, a sense that she wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove anything. She was simply sharing her music, her heart, with the room. The melody continued, slow at first, then gradually gaining strength. She blended the soft, broken notes with the stronger, clearer ones, creating a rhythm that felt like it had a life of its own. The audience could feel the story building. It was a story of resilience, of turning something discarded into something beautiful. People who had come expecting to be entertained were now captivated. They weren't just watching a performance, they were witnessing a transformation, a small miracle created with nothing more than patience, focus, and heart. Even as the music grew, she didn't rush. Each note had space to breathe. Each pause added meaning. The broken piano was no longer a source of embarrassment or doubt. Instead, it was a partner in her music, helping her tell the story she had kept inside for so long. The audience felt it too. The piano and the woman together had created something unexpected, something real, something magical. By the middle of her performance, the entire room had fallen into a quiet hush. No one dared move or speak. Some were leaning forward, gripping their chairs, completely absorbed. Others had tears in their eyes, caught off guard by the emotions stirring within them. There was no laughter anymore, no judgment, only awe. The simple woman who had seemed ordinary at first was now commanding the room, not with loudness or flash, but with truth, patience, and a deep understanding of music and heart. And yet, even as the notes continued, she remained humble. She didn't smile broadly, didn't bow, didn't show off. She simply let the music speak, letting the broken piano reveal its hidden beauty through her hands. The audience had been ready to mock, ready to dismiss her. Instead, they were mesmerized, watching as someone they thought was ordinary did something extraordinary with something they had all considered worthless. By the end of this part of her performance, it was clear that this was no accident. The simple woman had turned the broken piano into something alive, something more than just an instrument. She had taken the unexpected, the imperfect, and transformed it into music that touched hearts, that made people feel. People who had doubted her now realized that they had witnessed the beginning of something remarkable. The room, once filled with laughter and doubt, now sat in awe. Even the skeptics couldn't help but be impressed. They had expected a simple, clumsy performance. Instead, they had seen magic being born in front of their eyes. And the simple woman, sitting quietly at the piano, had shown them all that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the simplest people and the most overlooked places. By this time, the room had grown completely still. The audience had stopped talking, stopped fidgeting, even stopped moving. Every ear was tuned to the piano and the woman playing it. What had started as a simple, hesitant melody was now transforming into something much deeper and more powerful. The broken piano, once dismissed as useless, was singing in a way that seemed impossible. And the woman, who had seemed so ordinary at first, now commanded the room without even trying. Her fingers moved confidently now, finding patterns and rhythms that no one expected. Some keys didn't work at all, and others made strange, uneven sounds, but she turned every flaw into part of the music. Each mistake, each unexpected note, was woven into the melody with skill and heart. The audience could feel it. They could hear the story behind the notes, a story of patience, courage, and quiet determination. It was as if the piano itself was coming alive, singing with the emotion that had always been inside it, waiting for someone to understand. People in the room began to lean in, their faces showing amazement. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few held their hands to their chests, feeling a strange mix of awe and emotion they hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just a performance. It was something bigger. It was magic, the kind that comes from seeing ordinary things transformed into extraordinary beauty. And the magic didn't come from the woman being flashy or loud. It came from her quiet presence, her understanding of the piano, and her willingness to let the music flow naturally, flaws and all. The melody grew stronger, yet it didn't lose its gentle, soulful quality. She played with heart, weaving emotion into every note. The broken piano, with its missing keys and uneven tones, seemed to be singing a story that the audience could understand without words. It was a story about struggle and hope, about how something overlooked and imperfect could still be beautiful. People who had been skeptical before now realized they had been wrong. They had expected a simple, clumsy performance, and instead, they were witnessing something unforgettable. Some of the older audience members had tears in their eyes. Memories, long forgotten, seemed to return with each note. Perhaps it reminded them of a childhood piano, of moments when life felt simpler, of times when music had been a comfort. The younger listeners were captivated, holding their breath as the melody carried them to places they had never imagined. Everyone felt a connection, not just to the music, but to the woman herself. She was not just playing. She was communicating, telling a story without saying a single word. Her hands moved faster now, but every movement was deliberate. She didn't rush. She let each note settle before moving to the next. Even when the keys resisted or sounded harsh, she embraced them, making them part of the harmony. The audience realized something important. This wasn't about perfection. This was about understanding, about feeling, about finding beauty where no one else could see it. And that was exactly what she was doing. The room seemed to shrink around her performance. Everyone forgot about the decorations, the event, even the purpose of the gathering. All that mattered was the music, the piano, and the woman who had managed to turn something so broken into something magical. People who had come expecting to be entertained were now humbled. They had expected a joke, a small performance, and instead, they were experiencing a moment that would stay with them forever. Even the most confident musicians in the audience were in awe. They whispered quietly to each other, shaking their heads. "How is she doing this?" one asked. It shouldn't even be possible. But it was happening right in front of them. The woman didn't seem to notice the awe or the disbelief. She was focused entirely on the music, letting it flow through her and into the room. There was no ego, no desire to show off, just pure, heartfelt expression. The melody began to change, becoming softer and more delicate. She added pauses, letting certain notes linger longer than expected, creating a sense of space and emotion. Every key she pressed told a story, every silence spoke volumes. The broken piano, which had once been ignored and ridiculed, was now alive, and it had a voice that everyone in the room could hear. People felt the music in their bones, their hearts, their minds. It was almost as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. By the end of this part of her performance, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The laughter, the doubt, the whispers, they were all gone. What remained was silence, awe, and a deep respect for the woman at the piano. She had done something extraordinary, and it wasn't about skill alone. It was about seeing potential where others saw nothing, about patience, about love for the music, and about courage. As the last notes of this section faded, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The audience knew something bigger was coming. They didn't know exactly what, but they could feel it. They had witnessed the beginning of a transformation, a moment where ordinary had become extraordinary. And the simple woman, sitting quietly at the broken piano, had done something that would be remembered by everyone in the room for a long time. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting, captivated, unsure of what would happen next, but certain that it would be worth every second. The piano, the music, and the woman had created a story that words could not describe. And that story was far from over. The room was completely silent as she prepared to play the final part of her piece. Every eye was on her, every heart seemed to be waiting in anticipation. She didn't rush, didn't announce herself, and didn't look at the audience. She simply placed her hands on the keys, letting her fingers find their path naturally. The broken piano, which had once seemed like an obstacle, now felt like an extension of her. It responded to her touch in ways that amazed everyone in the room. As the first note sounded, soft and delicate, the audience felt a wave of emotion wash over them. The melody was simple at first, but it carried a weight that no one could ignore. The woman's hands moved with confidence, creating a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Every key she pressed told a story, and even the broken, silent, or sticky keys added their own voice. The room seemed to vibrate with emotion. People leaned forward, caught in a moment that was both magical and unforgettable. The music grew slowly, each note building on the last, creating layers of sound that were rich and full. She played with patience and feeling, letting the piano breathe as she did. Some notes were sharp, others soft, and some were unusual, almost imperfect, but they all fit together beautifully. The broken piano had been given a new life. And the woman, who had seemed simple and ordinary, had become the heart of this transformation. People in the audience were no longer thinking about appearances or skill. They were thinking only about the beauty unfolding in front of them. Tears began to appear on the faces of some audience members. Some of the older ones whispered softly to themselves, remembering times when music had touched their hearts in similar ways. Some of the younger listeners sat wide-eyed, unable to move, completely absorbed. Even the musicians who had come expecting to impress were now watching in awe, unable to hide their admiration. The simple woman had turned what they had thought of as a broken instrument into a source of pure wonder. She moved with grace, her fingers flying over the keys with both power and delicacy. The melody soared, rising higher and higher, yet it never felt forced or rushed. Each pause, each note, each gentle touch told a story of perseverance, hope, and courage. She was not just playing music, she was speaking directly to the hearts of everyone in the room. The broken piano, once neglected and ignored, now sang with life, carrying a message that words alone could not convey. The audience was spellbound. No one dared clap or make a sound, not wanting to disturb the fragile magic of the moment. The music was not just heard, it was felt. It moved through the room, touching hearts in ways that were unexpected and profound. People could sense the dedication and patience that had gone into this performance, the quiet strength of a woman who believed in herself when others did not. Every note was a testament to her courage, every chord a message of hope. As she reached the final part of the melody, the music became softer, almost whispering. The broken keys, the uneven sounds, the tiny flaws, all of them now blended together into a harmony that was mesmerizing. The audience leaned in, holding their breath, unable to look away. It was as if the room itself had become part of the music, listening intently, hanging on every note. And then, the final note rang out. It lingered in the air, pure and clear like a heartbeat. The room stayed silent for a moment longer, stunned by what had just happened. People's eyes were wide, some filled with tears, some reflecting amazement. The woman slowly lifted her hands from the piano, not saying a word. She simply smiled quietly, her expression calm but content. She had done what no one expected. She had turned a broken piano into a source of wonder. And in doing so, she had touched every person in the room. Then, as if released from a spell, the audience erupted into applause. Some stood, some clapped, some wiped tears from their eyes. People who had once doubted her looked ashamed but inspired. They had expected something ordinary, maybe even a joke, and instead had witnessed a miracle. The simple woman had reminded everyone that true talent and beauty are not always obvious, and that even something broken can create magic when met with patience, heart, and courage. From that day on, she was no longer just a quiet woman in the community. She became a symbol of hope and inspiration. People spoke about the evening for weeks afterward, telling the story of how a simple woman had turned a broken piano into something unforgettable. It was not just about music, it was about seeing potential, about believing in oneself, and about touching the hearts of others in ways that were unexpected and powerful. The piano itself, once forgotten and ignored, had been given a second life. And the woman, who had seemed so ordinary at first, had shown everyone that true magic comes not from perfection, but from heart, courage, and the willingness to try, no matter the odds. The memory of that night lingered in everyone's mind, a reminder that even the simplest people can create extraordinary moments when they follow their passion and trust in themselves. And so, the room that had once been filled with laughter and doubt was now filled with wonder, gratitude, and respect. The simple woman at the broken piano had done more than play music. She had changed hearts, inspired souls, and turned an ordinary evening into a night of unforgettable magic.